I have lived 2 streets from the marble gate of Wexholt for 31 years, and in all that time the only thing I have learned worth telling a stranger is this. The men who stand that gate are not statues, whatever the postcards say. They breathe. They ache. They count the minutes the same as the rest of us. The stillness is not the absence of a man. It is a man holding himself so hard that you mistake the effort for stone. I was a soldier once, a long time ago, in a smaller business than the one I am about to set down. Because I think I saw it coming sooner than the crowd did. I saw it the way you see weather arriving when you have lived your whole life under one sky. It was October and the cold had come early. I had walked down from my rooms before light, the way I do most mornings now that there is no one waiting on me, and I took my usual place against the iron railing across from the gate. Tourists were thin at that hour, a handful with cameras, a woman with a small dog. The lamps along the forecourt were still burning, throwing long yellow shapes across the wet cobbles, and the guard at the marble gate stood in the gray light with his rifle at his shoulder and his eyes fixed on nothing. I had seen this particular man before. You learn the faces if you come enough mornings. He was tall, square in the shoulders, with a stillness that was different from the others. The young ones hold their posts the way a boy holds his breath underwater, counting, straining, waiting for relief. This man held his post the way a door holds a frame. He simply belonged there, and you could not imagine the gate without him. I did not know his name then. I learned it later. It was Sergeant Adrian Cole. The state visit had been in the papers for a week. A delegation from Vossard, come for talks and treaties and the long, careful business that nations conduct in rooms with good lighting. The arrival ceremony was set for first light, and so a little after 7 the cars came up the mall and turned in at the forecourt, and the household formed up, and the band stood ready, and the whole great machine of welcome began to turn. Most of the delegation behaved as men do who are tired from travel and conscious of cameras. They moved in a polite clot toward the steps, but one of them did not. He was an officer, in a foreign dress uniform heavy with braid, a colonel by his insignia, and he carried himself the way certain men do when they have spent a career being saluted, and have come to believe the salute is owed to the flesh rather than the rank. He drifted away from his fellows. He stopped in front of Sergeant Cole. I was close enough to hear. That is the only reason I can tell you what he said. "So this is what they keep at the gate," the colonel said, loud enough for his aides who had stopped to attend him. He looked Cole up and down with a smile that had no warmth in it. A painted man, a toy soldier. Cole did not move. His eyes stayed forward. The colonel might have been a pigeon on the cobbles for all the notice he took. This seemed to please the colonel and to insult him at once. He stepped closer. He flicked a finger against the medals on Cole's breast, the way you might flick a child's toy to hear it rattle. "Ribbons," he said, "parade ribbons. You stand here in your fine red coat and your fur hat, and the tourists take their pictures, and you have never in your life smelled cordite. You have never heard the sound a man makes." He leaned in, close to Cole's still face. "Toy soldiers like you have never seen a real war." I felt my own jaw tight. I am an old man, and it is not my place to interfere with ceremony, but there is a particular kind of anger that comes to a man who has stood in a line himself and watched it broken, and that anger came to me then, watching this braided colonel mock a younger man who could not answer. Cole answered nothing. He held. The cold light slid down the barrel of his rifle, and he might have been cast from the same metal. The colonel was a man who needed a reaction the way a fire needs air, and getting none, he reached for more of it. He stepped sideways into the line of Cole's march, square in his path, and folded his arms. "Move me," he said. "Go on, you are a soldier, are you not? Make me step aside." It is a cruel thing, what he was doing, and I want to be plain about why. He knew the protocol. He knew the man at the gate is forbidden to break his bearing for insult, that the discipline which makes him magnificent is the same discipline that makes him a target for anyone small enough to use it against him. He was not testing Cole's strength. He was testing his chains. He wanted the crowd to see a strong man held helpless because it made the colonel feel large. And Cole did the one thing the colonel had not prepared for. When his sentry's pace required it, he did not shove the colonel and he did not freeze in confusion. He took a single measured step, turned with parade precision, and resumed his march along the prescribed line around the obstacle, exactly as the drill allows, giving the man neither contact nor acknowledgement, denying him the collision he had come for. It was the most contemptuous thing I have ever seen one man do to another, and not a word of it was spoken. The colonel's face went dark. He had been refused, and worse, he had been refused with manners. By now others had noticed. A few of the cameras had turned from the steps to the gate. The aides shifted, uneasy, sensing that their colonel had wandered somewhere they could not follow him. And from the direction of the forecourt, two figures were crossing toward us at a brisk walk. An officer of the household in the dark undress of the guard, the captain of the watch, I would guess, and beside him a much older man in the same heavy vassered braid as the colonel, but more of it, and worn differently. Worn the way a coat is worn by a man who has long since stopped noticing he has it on. This second man was a field marshal. Even from the railing I could see the colonel stiffen when he caught sight of him. The two of them reached the gate. The household captain said something low to Cole, a question, I think, for Cole's eyes flicked to him for the briefest instant and then returned to their forward fix. And the vassered field marshal stopped a pace from Sergeant Cole and looked at him, and his expression changed. I have thought a great deal since about what the old marshal saw that the colonel had not. They were standing in front of the same man. The colonel had seen a costume. The marshal saw the small bronze star at the head of Cole's row of ribbons, set above the rest, and he knew what it was, and he went very quiet. "Captain," the marshal said, not loudly, but in the way a quiet voice carries when everything around it has gone still, "who is this man?" The household captain answered him. He did not lower his voice. And I have always believed that was on purpose, so that the colonel and the aides and the cameras would all hear it together. "This is Sergeant Adrian Cole, sir, late of the Karen Rifles." A pause. "He holds the Sovereign Star." I heard the woman with the small dog draw in her breath, though I doubt she knew what it meant. I knew. Most men of my years knew. It is the highest thing the realm gives, and it is mostly given to the dead. You do not see it on a living breast above 3 or 4 times in a generation. "Saltmere," the marshal said. It was not a question. "Saltmere dawn, sir," the captain said. "The Karen Rifles held the ridge through the night and were overrun at first light. Sergeant Cole was the last man on his feet at the gun line. He held the position alone until relief came up the slope after dawn." Another pause, and the captain let it sit. "There were 11 men on that line at dark, sir. In the morning there was 1. I want you to understand what was happening on that wet cobbled forecourt while those words were spoken. The colonel who had flicked the ribbons, who had sneered that a toy soldier had never seen a real war, who had stood in this man's path and dared him to give ground, that colonel was learning, in front of his own field marshal and the cameras and the crowd, that he had spent his contempt on one of the few living men in either of our countries who had truly stood in the place he had only read about. He had lectured a survivor on the smell of cordite. He had mocked the silence of a man who had once held a line alone against the dawn and lived to keep the silence about it. The marshal turned to him. He did not shout. The worst of it was that he did not shout. "Colonel Rain," he said, "attention." The colonel came to attention. His face had gone the color of the cobbles. "You will salute the sergeant," the marshal said. There was a moment, only a moment, when I thought the colonel might refuse, and I think he thought it too, and I think the thought frightened him more than the order did. Because there is no refusing it. Not for a soldier. You may sneer at a costume, but you cannot sneer at the Sovereign Star, not in front of the man who wears it, not with the men of 2 armies watching, not when you have just been told what he did to earn it. To refuse would not be defiance. It would be the public admission of a small man. And the colonel, for all his cruelty, was not quite small enough to choose it in the open. He saluted, stiff, slow, his arm shaking very slightly at the elbow, a parade salute, rendered to the parade soldier he had mocked, and meaning now everything that a salute is supposed to mean and almost never does. And Sergeant Cole, who had not moved through any of it, who had borne the insult and the flicked medals and the body planted in his path without a flicker, came smartly to the present and returned it, crisp, faultless. He held the colonel's eyes for exactly as long as courtesy required and not one instant longer, and then he brought his arm down and shouldered his rifle and faced forward again, and the gate was the gate, and the man was the man, and it was as though the whole thing had never happened. The marshal said one more thing to the colonel before he steered him away toward the steps, and I did not hear all of it, but I heard the end. "The men who have seen it," he said, "do not talk about it. It is the others who cannot stop." Then they were gone up into the warm light of the palace, the colonel walking like a man who has aged a year in a minute, and the ceremony closed over the moment like water over a dropped stone. I stayed at the railing a while after the crowd thinned. The sun had come up fully now and taken the yellow out of the lamps. Sergeant Cole stood his post in the new light, eyes forward, breathing, aching, counting the minutes the same as the rest of us, and not a soul passing would have known that an hour before he had been called a toy, and had answered with a year of his life held perfectly still behind his face. I came down that morning to watch a ceremony. What I saw instead was the plain answer to a thing I had wondered about for 31 years, what the uniform is actually for. It is not for the tourists. It is not for the postcards. It is for the morning when a loud man mistakes silence for emptiness, and learns, too late and in front of everyone, that the quietest man at the gate is usually the one who has already seen the worst the world can do, and chosen, every single day since, to simply stand.